The Korean War is often called the Forgotten War, overshadowed by the massive legacy of World War II before it and the political spectacle of Vietnam after it. But the stories buried in the frozen hills, burned villages and shattered valleys of Korea reveal a side of warfare few ever study deeply. This wasn't a clean, modern conflict. It was brutal, raw, and often fought with improvised survival instincts that made the difference between life and death. For the first minute, let's set the tone clearly. If you think the Korean War was just another Cold War skirmish, think again. What unfolded from 1950 to 1953 was a collision of extremes: temperatures that froze rifles solid, terrain that swallowed entire battalions, and acts of endurance so shocking they almost seem impossible. This is the war that tested what it meant to survive when modernity failed and the ancient instincts of endurance returned. The Korean War began in June 1950, but it was the winter of that same year that seared itself into military history. Temperatures dropped to -35°C in the Chosin Reservoir region, where US Marines of the 1st Division and Chinese forces clashed in what's now known as the frozen Chosin. Equipment lubricants froze, morphine syrettes turned solid, and soldiers found their canteens useless because water froze within minutes. Many troops couldn't even remove their boots at night. Doing so meant waking up with blackened, dead feet. One forgotten detail, often missed in documentaries, is that soldiers began sleeping with their weapons under their coats, not to protect them from theft, but from the cold. Metal rifles could freeze to bare skin, and one touch without gloves could rip flesh clean off. Chinese soldiers wrapped their feet in rags and straw after running out of proper boots. Some units on both sides resorted to heating canned rations by placing them under their armpits during marches. Understanding this level of cold weather hardship isn't just morbid curiosity. It teaches how logistics and survival overlap in extreme conditions. Modern survivalists studying cold endurance can take notes from Chosin veterans who learned to keep body heat stable by rotating layers of frozen clothing against their own skin warmth. It's a reminder that human endurance, not technology, often decides the outcome of war. The Korean War wasn't fought on isolated battlefields. It tore directly through civilian life. The peninsula's small villages became the front lines, changing hands multiple times in the same week. Civilians were caught between ideological purges, mass evacuations, and bombings that left entire towns flattened. The destruction was so complete that by 1953, an estimated 80% of North Korean urban areas were destroyed by American air raids. In one of the least discussed atrocities, the No-Gun-Ri massacre, hundreds of South Korean refugees were killed by US forces in July 1950 after soldiers panicked over reports that North Korean infiltrators were disguising themselves as civilians. It was a stark example of how confusion and fear turned ordinary soldiers into executioners, a pattern seen again in later conflicts. For historians and students of human conflict, these civilian tragedies remind us of the thin line between order and chaos in warfare. For survival-minded viewers, they underline how quickly civil structures can collapse when communications fail and fear spreads faster than truth. The lessons drawn from Korea's scorched villages show why preparation and discipline matter as much in societal breakdown as they do on the battlefield. Korea's geography dictated everything. Jagged ridges, steep valleys and endless hills made tanks nearly useless and turned infantry movement into a test of endurance. Battles like Heartbreak Ridge, Porkchop Hill and Old Baldy became prolonged contests fought over just a few metres of elevation. Soldiers often lived for weeks in freezing foxholes, surrounded by uncollected corpses, swarmed by lice and living on powdered rations. This terrain warfare honestly reshaped how modern militaries approach small unit tactics. US and UN forces learned that traditional World War II-style assaults failed miserably against well-dug positions in Korean terrain. Instead, infiltration tactics, night raids and artillery coordination became the real tools of victory, or at least survival. For example, platoon leaders learned to move by contour, staying below ridgelines to avoid silhouetting against the sky. This simple adaptation saved thousands of lives and became a foundational lesson carried into Vietnam and beyond. For those studying survival under duress, these battles really demonstrate the power of environmental adaptation. Whether in wilderness training or urban conflict zones, the Korean experience proves that terrain is always the real enemy. And mastery over it, not just firepower, determines survival. Another horror buried under the headlines was the psychological toll of captivity. Both sides captured tens of thousands of prisoners, and the conditions were devastating. UN POWs in North Korean and Chinese camps faced forced marches through snow with little food or clothing. Disease, malnutrition and exposure killed more than bullets. Reports from survivors describe eating rodents, bark, or even boiled grass just to stay alive. But, the real battle was mental. Communist forces conducted re-education sessions, attempting to convert prisoners ideologically. Many resisted quietly by inventing secret communication codes or spreading humour among prisoners to maintain morale. 1U. From a modern perspective, these psychological survival stories are invaluable. They show how resilience comes not only from strength, but from mental adaptation. Anyone studying endurance, whether military, wilderness or crisis survival, can learn from how these men built inner systems of resistance even when stripped of everything physical. When the guns fell silent in July 1953, nothing was truly resolved. The Korean peninsula remained divided. The armistice was signed but never replaced by a peace treaty, and millions of families stayed separated across the 38th parallel. To this day, the DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone, remains one of the most heavily fortified borders on Earth, a living monument to a war that technically never ended. For historians, this unresolved state is the ultimate lesson in geopolitics and endurance. Wars may end on paper, but their echoes continue for generations. For survivalists, it's proof that preparation doesn't stop when the fighting does. Long-term resilience requires learning from the aftermath, not just the event itself. The Korean War's forgotten horrors aren't just tragic tales. They are blueprints for understanding endurance under impossible conditions. They teach the intersection between human will, adaptation and survival in a world stripped of comfort and clarity. If this kind of raw, unfiltered history matters to you, don't let it stay forgotten. Subscribe to Strange History and share this story with others who believe that understanding the past is the only way to prepare for the future.